offered fantastic performance, but the buying public definitely needed more, which could probably only be achieved via a larger capacity engine. In 1996, the Esprit received the engine that many thought it deserved maybe 15 years earlier, in the shape of a V8 engine. Designed by Lotus themselves and producing 350 brake horsepower, the Esprit at last could be recognised as a true supercar.
Well, in fact, this is my first Lotus Esprit. I did have a Lotus before, which was a Lotus Excel Celebration, which was a limited edition model. I traded that in this year for a V8, having tried some of the four-cylinder cars, which were impressive. The V8 is again quite something in terms of the performance, and that's what really swayed me in favour of a V8, although it has to be said it's not such a cheap car to run. I'd always loved the shape of the Esprit, and I think particularly since Peter Stevens redesigned it back in the late 80s, to me personally that is a more attractive shape, and I think he did a very good job of it. I think as somebody who's obviously involved in sort of designing the McLaren F1, then he can't be all bad. And it still turns heads now. It's a very nice, very distinctive car, still looks good, it hasn't dated, and it's something a bit different. I like to stand out from the crowd. Well, my car is a 96 registered, P-registered car, but it was originally registered and supplied, in fact, to one of the directors of Lotus. I think I chose the V8 really because I'd always wanted a V8 sports car of some kind. The appeal of the V8 is obviously because it does have that extra performance, although having had a go in one of the four-cylinder Esprits, which is an S4S, the performance was impressive. And the V8 is just in another league, and really it's as fast as anybody could reasonably want a road car to be. The 0 to 60 according to the autocar test was 4.2 seconds, and 0 to 100 is 10.5. Top speed, which is largely in irrelevance these days anyway, is reckoned to be between 175 and 180, so that's enough to keep most people happy. And of course the advantage of it is that, like all Lotus, the handling is superbly sorted. It is a surprisingly comfortable and civilised car to drive, and although the steering is power assisted, it's very nicely weighted, so you have the right amount of feel, and you really would be hard pressed to know that it is power assisted, unless of course you're driving it around town or trying to manoeuvre into parking space, when you obviously feel the benefits of that. When I bought the car, I did probably the best part exchange I could have hoped to have done on my Excel, and then paid cash for the balance. But it needed a few things doing on it, so it was quite reasonably priced, although all the history was there. And apart from having to have a new clutch in it, which was a fairly eye-watering bill shortly after I purchased it, most of the things I knew about and I budgeted for when I bought the car. The best things about the V8 are undoubtedly its handling and its performance. The ride quality is also very good for a car of its kind with such large wheels on it. The downside is, I'm afraid, the maintenance costs. Anybody who buys an Esprit V8 expecting it to be a cheap car to run is going to be in for a nasty surprise. It's not quite as horrendous as a contemporary Ferrari, and is marginally cheaper than a Porsche. But obviously you have a V8 engine with twin turbochargers, two very expensive catalysts to replace if they go wrong, and it's a lot of car to keep going, and needs to be kept right up to spec with the maintenance. I think, along with a lot of people, my earliest memories of the Esprit go back to the James Bond days, with the old style car. I can remember the first Esprit that I saw, which was an S1 of course, and was a bright red one, heading down a slip road onto the M2 shortly from where I lived with my parents at the time, and just being absolutely gobsmacked by it. It just looked such a wonderful shape. It was a real supercar, despite the fact it only had a four-cylinder engine, and the performance of the early ones was very respectable in comparison to some of its contemporaries. And I think there was also a slight swell of pride in that it was British made. and had all that marvellous racing heritage behind it. And these were the things that sort of appealed to me as a boy, which I carried through as a man, in that the first real performance car I had was a Lotus. Although I think there are many other marvellous marques and other cars that I wouldn't mind owning, somehow I always seem to come back to Lotus. So I'm a one-make bore now, it's official. I think the history of the Esprit is one of sort of continuous evolution rather than revolution, aside from the reskin which it had back in the late 80s. And I think it's a car that can still hold its own against some of the best performance cars of today. Yeah, so the reaction to the car is interesting, I think overwhelmingly positive. People know enough about the Esprit, has been around long enough to know what it is in most cases. I think that the fact that it's also British made means you tend to get a more positive response. I'm not sure whether it would be the same if it was a very bright colour, which is one of the reasons why I chose a darker one.
The Esprit is very much a hand-built car. It starts life as a galvanised steel backbone chassis with turrets at the front onto which the front suspension is mounted and a V-shape at the back into which the engine and gearbox are suspended. The first part of the build process is to attach the suspension, followed by the steering and the wheels, so in fact a rolling chassis is created. The rolling chassis is then ready to receive the in-house Lotus engine and the gearbox assembly before being removed to the final assembly area. Even at this very early stage, the vehicle will have an identity. The people that are building the car will know to which country the vehicle is to be supplied, so therefore is it to be built in left-hand drive or right-hand drive, what are the requirements for alarm systems, emission systems and so on. Having been completed to rolling chassis stage, the body, which would have been completed in another part of the Hethel facility, is made ready to lower onto the chassis. The body shell of the Lotus Esprit is of course made from reinforced glass fibre, which is lightweight. It's also very resilient in the event of an accident. I think it's fair to say that it's not just reinforced glass fibre, of course, because the whole body structure has to meet European and later on in life American federal standards of crashworthiness. The fitment of the body to the chassis is a relatively simple procedure of nuts and bolts. Upon completion of the fitment of the body to the rolling chassis, the whole vehicle is then moved on to the next part of the procedure, which involves the fitting of the doors, the bonnet, the tailgate, the interior trim, the glass, the instrumentation, and so on. Once the vehicle is finished, it will then pass to the final finishing area where it will be subject to some stringent tests, including of course a shakedown around the Hethel test track. I think the reason you buy any Lotus is for its fantastic ride and handling, a legacy from the Formula One days, the Colin Chapman days. Right until the end, the Esprit was winning awards for outstanding ride and handling capabilities, which I think even modern day cars will find difficult to surpass.